Well, today we're going to look at one of my all-time favorite vehicles, and that is this 1959 Bonneville Tri-Power Convertible. Yes, talk about one rare vehicle and in a stunning color combination, black with a silver and orangey red interior. My, it does not get much better than this. Now, for those who don't know, 1959 was the inaugural year of a couple things for Pontiac. The first was the advertising kind of tagline, the wide track Pontiac began in 1959. And it was true. Pontiacs did have a track in the front as well as the rear that was wider than the other General Motors cars there and the competitors. So that was actually had some truth to it as opposed to just being marketing. The other piece that the 1959 Pontiacs brought into the market is the beautiful twin port grille that you see here that was divided right down the middle. Interestingly, that was something that Pontiac designers had no idea it would become so popular and such a, overall face of Pontiac that in 1960, the 1960 Pontiacs did not have that front end before they would return to the split kind of twin port grille in 1961. Now, the front end of this, aside from having that beautiful twin port grille, I have to say has a number of other amazing styling features. The first is that beautiful Pontiac arrowhead styling on the hood. And what I love about this is you can see almost like a double arrowhead, an arrowhead within an arrowhead. Look at the emblem, how it looks like it's just kind of dripping off of the hood and is stopped before it kind of hits the ground. And it's made in its wake this other arrowhead. I think that is just one of the most fantastic looking styling features across any GM vehicle that I've seen. Interestingly, I will say that the hood cut line here and the gap for the hood overslam is amazingly small. Take a look there just beneath the arrowhead, and that's where the hood divides. And there's really no gap, so to speak, between the hood and then the lower portion of the sheet metal. I don't know how the designers got away with that with the engineers, but Pontiac for years had minimal hood overslam area, and somehow it ended up working. You also have the lower portions of the bumper that are flaring outboard, which was very atypical for the time frame because normally the bumper would kind of curl inward and be aligned with the sheet metal and how it tucks in at the rocker. And that was to kind of help the car in its stance because most of these had the wheels that were relatively inboard. But because this was the wide track Pontiac, designers could get away with that, and then it ended up looking okay. Although it's funny today, you see this car, and as we rotate around to the front three-quarter view, you think about them calling this a wide track. It doesn't really look much like a wide track, but it was for the time. And here, as we rotate around to the front three-quarter view, you can see that despite the fact that this is the wide track Pontiac, those wheels still look a little bit inboard, but we'll let that pass. Now, the one thing about the Pontiacs of this era is they have a lot of doodadery on the sides. They have this kind of body side molding, and then you have those four, I guess they're kind of like fake vents out back, these pot metal vents. And interestingly, if you got the Catalina, you didn't get any of them. If you got the Star Chief, you got a different style, kind of a cross out back. So it's just a little way to adorn the car. The unfortunate thing about the 59 Pontiac is that the molding and the various trim bits on the side aren't accentuating a body line. They're just kind of there to provide some visual interest. Whereas on other General Motors vehicles of the time frame, they were accentuating body lines and potentially looked better. Now, this car, I believe, somebody's added an aftermarket fender skirt to it. That should be an open rear wheel back there, and I think it actually looks better with an open rear wheel. But you'll notice that you have the rear fin, and the fin kind of has 2 points to it as opposed to a singular point. Of course, this was the fin era, the 1959 Cadillac being the supreme development of the fin over at General Motors. And GM trying to compete with the fins that Chrysler came out with in 1957 on their forward look cars. These 1959 cars were never designed to look like this, but they were total melt and repours after General Motors designers had seen the 1957 Chryslers and thought the designs that they were working on were just going to be stale once they hit the showroom. And as we rotate along to the rear three-quarter view, you see those fins that I was mentioning. And actually, one of the stories that I heard from a designer back in the era was that Harley Earl, the General Motors design vice president, when he was reviewing this proposal for the 1959 Pontiac rear end, he came by and he kind of squinted at the rear end and looked at it and then said, it kind of resembles cat's ears, which it does. It kind of looks like a cat, back there. and then he told the designers to release it. I think it's a totally believable story. It certainly looks true. But again, this was a really different type of fin from the other General Motors cars, but it gave Pontiac a bit of a distinctive look. Of course, in 1960, it just would have a totally different rear end to it. Now, as I mentioned, if you got the Bonneville, you got the wider tail lamps, and you also got those 4 pieces of trim on the side. And yeah, I think it's overall, this rear 3/4 view on this car is quite handsome. I should have pointed out that in front of the door, you do have the Tri-Power badge. And that's because this car is equipped with a Tri-Power engine under hood, the 389 V8, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, as you take a look at this other rear 3/4 view where the convertible top is up, you can see those cat's ears even better. Now, this car has the optional reverse lights. And yes, back during this time frame, reverse lights were not standard on all cars. In fact, outside rear view mirrors were not even standard on cars during this era, particularly on the passenger side. And sometimes even on the driver's side, you didn't have an outside rear view mirror. My 1959 Pontiac Parisienne has no outside rear view mirror at all, which seems strange until you realize that you have pretty much perfect visibility out the side. You just need to turn your head. In any case, like I said, these are the reverse lights on this car. If you didn't get the reverse lights, they just had a metal plug there, and it kind of looked hilarious. But well, this was the 50s, and roads were less, I would say, congested, and there was less traffic, and safety wasn't all that large of a concern anymore. By the way, the gas filler door is hidden kind of underneath the trunk of the deck lid in that Pontiac block lettering, in case you're wondering, because you're not going to see a fuel filler door on either side. I do love that the bumper here is kind of canted at an angle, and it helps give the car this look of motion, that it's leaping forward. It'd be nice maybe if the fins also had shared that same angle or done something a little bit different. To me, it looks a little bit strange and unfinished that the fins are just kind of perfectly upright and then the bumper is at this angle. Looks like something, should be a little different. But what do I know? I'm not a car designer. Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. You can also see what I was mentioning, that the trim, that body side molding, is not accentuating any sheet metal change. It's just there on the body side. By the way, the doors on these Pontiacs were shared across the 1959 cars, and Buick was the division that made the template for the doors. So these cars share the windshield, the A-pillar area, the front doors, and a number of other components because they really needed to for expediency, and it helped also with cost. Remember, as I said, these cars were designed kind of at the last minute in a very rushed manner, and as a consequence, they had to share quite a bit of components so that they could be released on time. Now, the interior of the vehicle is about as wild as the exterior, and also just about as fantastic. This is a rare one with bucket seats. Notice there's not even a center console up here. This was kind of an era before bucket seats were all that popular, and you still have the column shifter as opposed to a floor shifter, but just a fantastic interior. I love the trim, the bright work trim on those bucket seats, that reddish orangey stripe down the middle, the beautiful dash with the kind of 3-gauge pods, beautiful door panels. It's just amazing what General Motors was able to produce during this time frame. And again, this is a Pontiac. It is admittedly a Bonneville, so it's the up-level Pontiac, but it's not a Cadillac. It just looks absolutely fantastic. And it's unfortunate today when you get cars, you have so much plastic and rubber flubber and solidified lava in the interiors, and no color. It's always kind of black or gray, just bleh. Or as my friend Mark would say, ugh. But this one just looks a heck of a lot better. Now, let's take a closer look at the instrument panel. You have the speedometer in the middle, the fuel gauge, as well as the generator gauge. These didn't have an alternator yet. They still have the generator. And then the idiot lights off to the right. But I did want to point out the shift quadrant. Notice it says PNDR. There's 2 drive ranges. Then L and then R is all the way at the end. And that is because this has the old school 4-speed hydromatic. It doesn't have the turbo hydromatic. This is the 4-speed hydromatic. And this is before they standardized the shift quadrant as well. So reverse was all the way at the end of the shift quadrant. It's a bulletproof transmission overall. It doesn't shift nearly as smoothly as the turbo hydromatics, which are just silky smooth, like a hot knife through butter, the newer turbo hydromatics. I said newer. They're certainly not new. But look at all the buttons, and everything here is just beautiful, bright work and metal. They don't make gauges like this today. I don't know about anybody else. Put a comment in the comment section, but these LCD gauges and LCD screens, I really just prefer something that's truly three-dimensional like this, that has some depth as opposed to just a flat screen. I think it looks a heck of a lot better. But hey, that's not what automakers are looking to do these days, so oh well. Even the door panel on this car is fantastic. This one's a rare one with power windows. You can see the power window switch up there. Somebody, I think, has put the door pull handle here in the wrong position. Looks like it's kind of off by 90 or 120 degrees, pointing downward. The lever there that activates the door to exit. Not quite sure what happened there. But in any case, a beautiful door panel with that kind of pointed star up top. You do have the vent windows. You have the crank for the vent window. And look at all the bright work and the stitching, the multiple colors, multiple textures. On the top there, you have the silver kind of vinyl portion. You have this textured white area. Then you have the bright work and more white vinyl. It's just a fantastic piece of art. They don't do door panels like this today either. Now, as we move to the under hood area, as I mentioned, this is a tri-power equipped Pontiac. And 1959 was the first year for the 389 cubic inch V8. Pontiac would produce the 389 from 1959 all the way through the 1966 model year, and then for 1967 it would be enlarged to 400 cubic inches. Now, in 1958, the engine was a little bit smaller. It was 370 cubic inches, and the 389 had some new things. It had 3-inch main bearing journals as an example, and that was because this was Pontiac's, I believe, first use in this era of a cast crankshaft, an Armasteel crankshaft, as opposed to a forged crankshaft. And as a consequence, the engineers really kind of overcompensated with very large main bearing journals. I don't think anybody had any issues with these crankshafts on these vehicles. I haven't heard of Pontiac V8s failing with greater frequency. In fact, many in the industry subsequently went to cast crankshafts over a period of time, I think because of the success that GM had with its so-called Armasteel use on these crankshafts. In any case, there were a number of 389 V8s. The standard in the Catalina and the Star Chief was a 280 horsepower high compression 2-barrel 389. And then in the Bonneville, you had a standard high compression 4-barrel equipped 389 that made 300 horsepower. Then you had the tri-power that made 315 horsepower that you see here. Interestingly, in 1958, you could get fuel injection in your Bonneville, but by 1959, there was no fuel injection anymore, and the top engine was what I just mentioned that's under hood here. And this one is obviously quite well equipped. It also has power brakes. It has the power steering option. All of this was optional back in the day. And interestingly, Pontiac took a different tactic from Chevrolet, as did the other divisions, admittedly, where Chevrolet had the generator in line with the power steering pump. I always thought that was an interesting approach. But here for Pontiac, that was not the case. But regardless, you have a pretty awesome power package, and these 389s would power the full-size Pontiacs very well. Even the economy 389s were surprisingly peppy. I should have mentioned, there was an economy V8, a low-compression 389 that made, I think, 215 horsepower that you could get as a no-cost option in your Pontiacs as well. So you could get everything from an economy V8 to a tri-power 389. They were all 389s, though, for 1959. Nothing bigger than that, and nothing smaller than that either in the full-size Pontiac lineup. So what do you think of this awesome 1959 Bonneville convertible? Put a comment in the comment section and let me know. Thanks again for watching.